James, thanks so much for taking time to chat. Do you want to quickly introduce yourself?
Yeah, my name's James Hattin. James David Hattin, as I credit myself because I like all three names. I'm the co-founder of VFX Legion. I'm a compositor by trade and a business owner out of necessity. I've been doing it for about 10 years now, just hit our 10-year anniversary.
That's awesome.
So,
Happy birthday.
Yeah. Thank you. It's been a long, rocky road.
I was kind of curious to start out, and I always ask all my guests this, but did you always imagine yourself in some kind of creative career early on?
I wanted to do acting and then psychology. And those are the two key ones. And then I was listless for years, maybe wanted to cook. When desktop computing became powerful enough to do visual effects, and somebody was like, here's some crack software. And I immediately just took to it. And it was like, oh, I can do something that's creative, that's problem solving, but because I'm not like an artist, but I've got an eye for like the final product, and I had a brain for it. So yeah, once I knew it could be done, yeah, I did see myself doing it for a living.
That's cool. And yeah, I feel like that's it. You gotta have that catalyst of seeing what others have done. Like it's usually seeing all the other work that's done before you that gets you inspired and makes you kind of curious about like, okay, well, how do I get started? And, you know, naivete kind of comes into it in the sense that if you knew how much work it would be, you probably wouldn't have done it in the first place, but here you are, you know.
Yeah, I went to a junior college up in Sacramento, and they had a really good food program. So I started the food program. And after a while, I realized that I did not want to be working 12 to 16 hours a day in a hot kitchen. I mean, who wants to work those kinds of hours? You know, cut to 15 years later, I'm going home at 4 in the morning. I'm back at the office at 8 o'clock, and, you know, I'm working 20 hours. So the only advantage was I was sitting down. But
I guess there's always that. I've definitely done my fair share of all-nighters, but I kind of feel like these days things are a bit more, I guess more budgeted better in the sense that the studios tend to, you know, not make everyone nickel and dime and fight for a project. So it means that you can schedule things out properly and have that work-life balance, which 10, 20 years ago, that seems like a pipe dream.
it was, yeah, especially in the TV world. Yeah.
Yeah, and that's a good point too. Like, I think a lot of people kind of don't realize the difference between even streaming versus TV networks, because I know you've done a bunch of both, and
Yeah.
there's definitely a very big divide between those two alone.
Yeah, Quantum Leap that we just wrapped season 1 on, and we started on season 2. That actually was the first couple of all-nighters I've had in a really, really long time, and that was because we were up against air dates. You know, we were delivering the show 3 days before it was going to be on TV. You know, they need time to like master it and get all the things put together and get it delivered to the studio, to the, you know, whoever airs it. Kind of a crazy ride.
Run the gauntlet. Kind of just to fast forward a little bit, but like you finally discovering visual effects, so I was kind of curious, like, how did you get your first big break?
2 parts to that answer. I learned like the basics, and I was doing motion graphics. So I was landing like car commercials in Sacramento and stuff like that, and just educational stuff. I was feeling particularly bummed at some point. I had a really low point where I was like, I don't know where my next check's coming from. I don't know what I'm doing. And my buddy Mark Allan still works down here, does a lot of live events right now. He's been doing all the Emmy graphics and stuff. He called me down here on a Monday night. He called me on a Monday afternoon, and he said, we're starting tomorrow in Santa Monica. Can you come down and start working, doing compositing? And I said, hold on, let me check something real quick. I was on a break with my girlfriend at the time, and I called my buddy who lived in Calabasas, Thousand Oaks. And I said, hey, can I crash on your sofa for like 2 weeks? And he was like, yeah, sure. So I hopped in my car and I drove down here, and I've been working down here basically ever since. And that was 1999.
That's awesome. I'm always curious about that because I've got so many friends who've had similar stories, and I always kind of think of that whole what if. In other words, like, what if I, you know, said no at the time or procrastinate a little bit longer, and, you know,
Yeah.
what I'm still doing the same thing.
I can answer that. No. I don't know that I would have had another chance. I mean, if I had turned that down. It was just so fortuitous that it happened. And the money was like the most I had ever made in my life, and it wasn't that much, by today's standards. You know, it was like $1,200 a week or something.
Mm-hmm.
But it was just, you know, triple whatever, you know. I could go shopping for food, you know. It was like one of those things, you know, you're not buying ramen anymore. You're suddenly like a normal human. So that was fun and fancy.
That's awesome. You worked at Pixel Magic. I bumped into someone somewhere. I don't recall who or where or what, but they also worked at Pixel Magic on Blade, because I was working at Digital Dimension doing all the Blade ashing shots, and I remember all the stuff that Pixel Magic had done as well. What was that experience like working on that film and working at Pixel Magic?
I was on Blade 3 there, if I'm not mistaken. Blade Trinity. I have a couple really fun shots on that movie. I have really fond memories of Pixel Magic. It was one of the first times I've been in like a bullpen environment with a bunch of other compositors, and we all three of us knew each other from the first job that I came down here for Filmworks, working for Albert P. and who recently passed away. When I first got there, Todd Vaziri was there.
Todd was working there? I didn't know that.
Yeah, in the corner for like a hot minute. I mean, he was like, I think at like Cantina or something, and then stepped over to Pixel, and then he left from Pixel to go to ILM.
Never looked back.
And then Sherry Hitch was there too, who was just another mutual friend who bounced straight up to ILM and has been there ever since as well. Just super talented people. Yeah, I was just getting started back then, so it was fun. There were a lot of movies we worked on there. We touched a lot of frames. Yeah, the Blade project, there's a shot that does a 360, either flips over his head, starts upside down and flips over or something in Blade Trinity, and it was tracking like the far distant shore city line on the water had to be tracked in.
Was that a car chase or something, or?
It was not. He was just like standing on a dock. It was like, as they're getting ready to go do something. I haven't seen the movie in 20 years.
So. Yeah, I'm just kind of curious, just for my own sake, but like, what other shots did you work on that movie?
Honestly, remember.
Impressed.
The memories I have are the first Spider-Man movie with Tobey Maguire, 2002-ish. It was basically paint-outs. I was back using Commotion back in the day.
Commotion had a really good tracker, from what I recall.
They did, yeah. And it was Flash getting punched by Toby. And they did the retimes in the Cineon or the Quantel box. And it had like the visual warping. And I had to go in there and literally frame by frame paint like the lockers behind them, paint them all straight because they were all warped. And so it was just like weeks and weeks of work on like 3 shots. Got to see my name in the credits and stuff. And it was like the first like really big movie, and we weren't like the primary vendor or anything. And that was sort of the cool thing about Pixel Magic, is you got to work on like A-list movies, but you're not the primary vendor. So you can say, you know, I worked on Fantastic Four, I worked on 2 of the Spider-Man movies, I worked on Blade Trinity. I was the comp supervisor on Taxi, which I don't know if anyone's heard of, but... Is
that the Luc Besson one, or is it the other?
It was the American one, yeah. Jimmy Fallon and Queen Latifah.
Yeah, because I always remember that it's like, there's Taxi Driver, I think is Luc Besson, doing like 3 or 4 of them. Then there's Taxi Driver, which was, the Queen Latifah one.
Lots of driving comps that were they still hold up. I just watched it like not that long ago. I showed it to my kid, and I'm just like, I did that. That's mine. I like
it's
always fun when you get to do that.
Again, like I felt like Digital Dimension, Pixel Magic, there's like a few other studios that, you know, obviously you have the AAA ones at the time, and then you had these other ones that I felt, you know, obviously are more the support studios, but so much great talent coming out of them. It's just obviously you're working on smaller stuff, but you know, you can kind of tell the people who are around you that are going to go places and do big things just because they're amazing talent. Yeah, it's always inspiring to kind of see like 10 years later, like where everyone ends up, you know, so.
It is, yeah, it totally is. Was Digital Dimension, did they work on The Guardian? That might have been Flash Filmworks.
Yeah, I think so. It was Jason Crosby, Benoit Girard, Marion Spates, who's like the #2 VFX suit for Stranger Things these days. Like, again, nice. Everyone kind of went off and did great things. We're a 3ds Max house, and
oh wow, okay, cool.
Yeah, we're comping in Fusion. We had a really tight relationship with J.J. Abrams back then, so there's a lot of like Alias, and we did the Lost pilot, which won an Emmy. A lot of random stuff. We got an Emmy for Super Bowl one year doing the opening ceremony for it as well. A few things like that, but
Very cool.
you know, it was interesting place, not enjoyable, but also not the best leadership there either. But for me, I kind of look back at that as a lot of amazing talent kind of going off to, you know, other places, launching studios. So that's kind of like my fond memories of the place, at least. But yeah, I was kind of curious with you. I mean, obviously working on a lot of big films and big projects. Like for you, are there any ones that kind of stood out as being really memorable or challenging in their own way that you're proud of?
Yeah, so if you go back to the Pixel Magic days, I would say The Guardian. I think I was comp suping or lead 2D artist. And it's Ashton Kutcher and Kevin Costner play Coast Guard people. But there's like this whole sequence at the end where it was just like all practical elements, just getting water crashing over and, you know, blue screens that were crazy, dark, and, you know, just like nothing conducive to compositing, and just having it all get out there and get it up on screen and just be like, oh, damn, it worked. Like all those pieces came together and they really worked. I was at ILM for a hot minute working on Pirates 3. That whole thing broke me as an artist and changed my thinking about everything. Mm-hmm. But the experience getting there and finding out that Davey, which I wanted to comp Davey, in the world's worst way. So I come in as like a senior comper and I find out that the rig had basically gotten so good and so photographically perfect that the junior artists were comping 80% of the Davey shots, at least, you know, in the first few months of the project. So I was getting like these impossible keys that I was like trying to get help with, because it was like available light, blue screens on a stage where they had the boats in the rain and everything has like a black fringe around the edge.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I'm just like, this is so hard. I just want to comp the guy with the tentacles. A few shots, a Davey that I really liked, really came together, and that was super notable. But it was also, you know, sort of a life-changing experience to work with like so many people who are so much more talented, and you kind of go in there from your own little world of being like, hey, I'm cock of the walk of my own little world. It's really tiny little fish into a really big pond, and the really big pond has really big freaking fish in it that all are really good at what they do. So that was a really...
Most people are pretty humble as well, which is really great.
I wish out of my office. So I started the business out in the shed in my backyard, Legion. And I've got up on the wall, my friend made me a thing called the humility scale, because my supervisor there, I think he was the comp soup, Eddie, I don't think he liked me like at all. And he would constantly call me in and tell me, you need to be more humble. Like, you just need to be like, dial it down. And I didn't know what that meant at that time. I wasn't like in that space. And so I told my buddy about it, who was sat across from me doing some 3D stuff, dynamics. And he made me, I came in one day and he had this like humility scale, and it's like literally just humility scale, a gradient, and a yellow sticky that you move up and down. It's like, are you more humble today? And towards the end of the project, Eddie walks over and he looks at it and he goes, humility scale. And I don't get it. He walks off. So I moved it up.
I like it.
It was good.
I mean, you know, it's just kind of funny because I've always found that ILM, you're right, like it attracts the best talent in the world, especially when it was a bit smaller. It's a big monster machine these days, but it still attracts the best talent. But at the same time, like most people, it's like you go in there with this expectation that like, you know, I'm good enough to get here, but that doesn't mean that, you know, here it's like a reset button. It's not great. I'm so great. It's like, great, now I'm surrounded with 1,000 more great or greater people.
Yeah.
But then there's occasionally, you know, one or two people come in who are just kind of just ego, and it's just, you know, I've always found that hilarious in dailies when it's just someone who's telling John Knoll or Dennis Muren or Pablo Hellman like, no, you don't understand. Let me lecture you about like why, you know, why shit is correct and not wrong. And it's just kind of like take a step back and realize where you're at, you know?
I fortunately never defended my work because I did know that much. I was smart enough to know that. But I did, in front of John Knoll, say, do you think it's the Fresnel pass? And then I, like, my brain, it came out. And my brain's like, no, you idiot, you idiot, you idiot. Fresnel. I meant to say, God damn it.
You gotta recite the whole Fresnel table just to be like, I know what I'm doing, I swear.
Yeah, I mean, I had like literal fanboy moments there because,
Sure.
you know, working with John, which is like, he's an electric image guy back in the day, doing with the Star Wars New Hope redo and stuff. So, you know, I kind of idolized him as like, you know, the prime electric image user, you know, like bringing desktop computers to the scene. And so I was just like, he was like my hero at the time.
He's coming on the podcast in a couple of weeks, I believe, so that should be pretty exciting.
Oh, fun.
Yeah. But
don't geek out. Just don't geek out.
For now. If you mentioned like, oh, there's one guy, this one time, just touching on Allan, but were you comping in Saber or in Nuke, or what were you using at the time?
They were using Shake for a hot minute.
Right.
So they had just come off of comp time. They were using Shake on their way to Nuke. So they were testing Nuke using Shake. So that was 2006. And I switched over to Shake in 2003 at Pixel Magic. So I felt like I knew where it was at. And they were coming off of comp time, and half the people that were like the old timers didn't know Shake, didn't know nodes. Comp time is basically an After Effects sort of knockoff, you know, kind of layer based. And I didn't understand their lingo, like pin the blacks. I didn't know what that meant. And so there was like all this like lingo that came from comp time. And I was like in Shake trying to make sense of it. It's like, well, what do you mean pin? What does that mean? You know,
all the blacks, or what does that mean?
Yeah, I was like, take the CG and match your blacks in the scene, and just like, there's actually a node for it. And you just, but I didn't know what that was. I'm like, I don't know your lingo, guys. I tried opening comp time, or I tried learning it, and that caused like I got a lot of grief there. I tried to use Matador. That's what it's called, right? The Commodore is their paint and tracking program.
I think there is some proprietary tool somewhere. It's called Matador.
Commodore is Commotion and Matador put together.
Got it. Okay.
So it had a great tracking tool. It was like what you mentioned about Commotion, is you would track and then you could do a refine track. And so you would be able to refine down your tracks. And when I was trying to, you know, do stuff in Shake, where Shake's limitations were you can't undo anything. Painting is fun, but you only get so many strokes before it has a stroke.
I've never that one. I love Shake. I grew up on, before I moved to Nuke, I was a Shaker for sure.
Yeah, it was great, but its limitations were legendary. But Commotion was just like the tool, even though it was raster paint and not vector paint. Just the ability to like Z and X, you know, paint. I
was actually there for a meeting when we're discussing about whether, because we're using Nuke, but whether or not to be accepted as being a key piece of their tech stack, just because they didn't own it. So therefore, you know, it's risky. You fast forward even a year later, I feel like ILM did like a 180 on like, hey, if we want to survive the climate that we're in, you know, using out-of-the-box software is actually a pretty smart idea. But at the time, it was sacrilege to rely on a piece of software that they can't look under the hood and really, you know, call their own. That's where I learned Nuke. So yeah, it's like, you know, definitely kind of set my spark of going down that path. I was just kind of curious with Zoic, when you first started there, like what was your experience like, knowing how much they've grown in over the years, and your contributions there as well? What was that like?
Yeah, it's weird. I still consider it sort of a second home. I got laid off 10 years ago this month. We're still in May. So that was sort of the anniversary, the kickstart into Legion. But when I got there in 2009, it was to work on the V reboot.
I was with VFX Soup, the final episode of that, actually.
Oh, fun.
yeah, they over negotiated everything so much. I was like, this is getting so complicated. I'm just gonna take a vacation. But yeah, very familiar with that show.
The first day it was like 8 hours, and then Karen Zuckerberg, who was the producer on it, who I've stayed friendly with over the years, she walked up at sort of the end of my shift and she's like, can you plan on being here like 10 to 11 hours tomorrow? And I'm like, yeah, sure. I guess that's fine. And then the next day she came in and she's like, can you do 12s or more? And I'm like, yeah, okay.
You got the valet to move your car to
right. Yeah, I got Anthony to move the car.
That's right.
So it basically it turned into like just, half overnights and stuff like that, just to work on V. So somebody else had developed this technology to do the tracking on the ceiling with the witness camera on top of your rig. So it would give you tracking data. The whole room would be green screen or blue screen or whatever. And so ostensibly you plug in your tracking data into your Maya scene, and it just works, right? It just renders you out what you need. Everything was green screen, so you're just pulling a key and you're done. Yeah, it didn't really do that. That was the advertisement. The reality of it was that it was like a lot of hard work and a lot of nuanced keying and tracking. A whole tracking department to basically throw away the tracking data because you really couldn't massage it into place. It's like tracking data is like very weird that way. Like once you start poking at it, it just breaks. So it was a lot of just grabbing objects in the scene or grabbing dirt on the green screen, like doing a high pass filter in Synthesize and just grabbing like random crap around the room on the floor and just there's your 6 points, there's your 12 points, and tracking the scene. The whole team was amazing. This is where I learned sort of this subtractive keying technique that we use today at Legion as our kind of foundational methodology. And Nate Overstrom there sort of got some tech stuff and started building a keyer that worked. And it was one of these setups where basically you put in a clean screen, you put in a D-spill, and it just magic happens, and boom, you've got yourself like a key. And it's really awesome because at some point between like V, started on V but went into Wonderland, they love to shoot through fuzzy objects. They love to shoot through things in the foreground, and
rather than just add things in the foreground.
Yeah, they literally would have people crossing and stuff like that, and you couldn't roto it. Like it was just too much. Like roto doesn't look right when you do that. So the idea is that you have to like geek tech talk here is you have to like get a perfect key. Like you have to like mathematically say the green pixels, I want their luminance value out, and that is replaced by an image. And if you go too hard on the key, it turns gray because you're seeing, the D-spill, and too light, obviously, it's transparent. So you have to find that like perfect meeting of it, and like learning when you have 300 shots a week that you have to like find out how to make all this foreground stuff, all this motion blur stuff work. Because when people do this and you try and do a key of that, like if you know the old After Effects days or whatever, where you just like you're pulling a mat and then you're taking your D-spill and you're just using it, pre-multiplying it. Like it doesn't work, right? It's got little holes in it, the motion blur gets chunky and gray, and there's this elegant way of doing it, but we worked on refining that, and then we went into Once Upon a Time is the name of the show.
That's right.
I think it was still V, but I found out that because we were taking so long, every shot had to be started from scratch in V and going into Once. And that setup alone, like we started doing the math and the numbers of like what it actually, like what kind of money we're making. And I was not part of the budgeting or anything at the time. I was just like, I hear this isn't profitable. And like my brain says, well, how do you fix that? And so the first thing I did was like, well, if everyone's working off of the same raw template, and basically you're just bringing in your screen, you're changing out your tracking information, you've got your renders, the renders are all broken out already because you're using some kind of system.
Mhm.
then, you can do a shot in 20 minutes versus, it was taking 3, 4, 5 hours to do all this work. And so over the course of Christmas break, it was Christmas break in like 2010. One of the guys up in Vancouver, his name is Matthias, and he worked with Legion for years as well. He and I got together and I built a script, a template script, and then I gave it to him and I said, now use this for shots 40, 70, and 90.
Mhm.
And just let's see how fast you can get them done and publish them to Shotgun. And, he would do it. And it was like literally in one afternoon, he had done like 4 or 5 shots and published them. And it was like, at that point, I knew that like the idea of templating stuff for a pipeline that big and that fast that needs to move, that show was up against air dates as well. I mean, they aired on Thursdays and we delivered on Tuesdays. Like that was a big thrill for me because that was like the idea that you could, take another company, like, be a part of something like that where you have a big company that's got a problem, right?
Yeah.
It's like you got a problem and no one's acknowledging it. Like internally, I'm sure they're like, financial people are like, but as soon as I heard about it, I was like, oh, well, we have to fix this because that's what you do. Visual effects is all about solving the problem. So once you get presented with the problem, you get to solve it. And so that's my fun times.
I think that's one of those things that a lot of people are too busy doing to ever take a step back and look at, is there a better way? And having that 30,000 foot view of everything. I mean, what you're describing too, it's kind of also justifies at certain studios why you would build teams. Because if it's you're doing a lot of this type of shot, then build a team for that and have a lead under there, just making sure things are all consistent. Another lead on another team, and that way things can kind of function as separate units, the same way that standardizing everything with scripts and workflows, building the methodology out, all this stuff's so important. But a lot of times people are like, no, we just got to move, we're going to go quicker, and you end up doing 10 times the amount of work. It's kind of funny that we're talking about Blade earlier, but that was for me one of the first times where like we killed 120 vampires on that film, and the way we were doing it was like 8 people were involved in one vampire death. So it'd be one person does the fire, one person does the smoke, one person does the sparks, one person does the shader. I was looking at that like there's got to be a better way, and it wasn't until after the movie was done that's when I first started learning to script and build a tool where it's like, you build out the workflow, then you reverse engineer into a tool, and then you click on the character, you choose the frames that you want, hit a button, and it generates everything. And that workflow kind of changed how I do everything now, where it makes sense to automate, you can automate everything. And it means that not only are you able to do it quicker, but it means that a senior artist doesn't necessarily need to be the one working on every shot. You could have a senior artist look at it and then hand it up to a mid-level, and they can all as an army work on everything.
That's exactly what we did until they stopped using it. But while it was on my shows, it was the ability to have like 4 or 5 senior leads putting together the templates and then handing those off to like mids and even some juniors. The limiting factor is people not understanding how the tools work. And this is something I've always wanted to like get past, because even now our keying rig is like in Nuke, it's like 3 pages tall. And when the junior and the mids get it, they don't know what is broken. Like something very simple at the top, like just needs to be adjusted. Like you just need to, like the IBK, you just need to just tweak it a little bit, and it, everything works downstream. And what they'll do is they'll just like, no, this doesn't work, and they'll just tear it out and start doing their own patches and fixes on it. So you would get it like downstream later, close to the air date, when the shots aren't getting finaled, and you're like, why aren't they getting finaled? It's in my template, it works, right? You open it up and you just see like these little scribbles of node clusters off to the side, and you're like, oh no, oh no, they don't understand how it works. So, but the education is a super important factor, I guess, is like where that was going, was that it's ideal to have the teams, it's ideal to have the lead and the people working together, but artists need to understand like how it works, so that when you do try to automate this template thing, you don't need to understand how a car drives, but you do need to understand that if the tire's flat, the car doesn't go. So you need to know at least that much. And So I would advocate for better training and better education.
Yeah, no, I think it's so critical to yeah, to have that process and people to understand like what and why something works, because again, you could have 20 color corrects and then you're unpremult and then you know sharpen node, that'll give me more detail, right?
It does, yeah, totally does. Yep. Not
Well,
just
and again, that's
contrast.
why the art and science of digital compositing is kind of like the greatest handbook to have.
The Holy Grail, yeah.
Yeah, you don't need to know how to code and do all the math and everything, but just understanding like what these nodes are doing, it helps you understand like, okay, well, now I understand why I'm getting like really weird artifacts and matte edges
Yeah.
and the stupid shit in my comp.
Getting that there is math involved is super important. Coming from like the After Effects world, as I started in After Effects and I had to force my brain to switch over to Shake at the time, just force over to nodes. It's like in After Effects, it's all just handed to you, right? It's all just given to you. It's like everything's pre-multiplied. You apply color, you just make layers, and you make nested comps, and you make so many mistakes. And it wasn't until I could see it in front of me as like, oh, this is like these do the things, and this is the over, and suddenly it just made more sense. It's like, oh, there's like actual stuff going on here. There's like stuff going on in the background, like, and that's where I didn't understand how compositing worked until I got into the node space. It's like I was just banging on edges. I worked on Daredevil. There's a whole fight scene at the end of the movie where they're hanging from this big church organ thing, and they're swinging at each other and punching, and most of those are my shots. And I had like degrained them. I had run a motion blur, real smart motion blur on their mats, so as they swing, you could get like the motion blur built in back in, because you had to crunch it out, because we didn't have that keying methodology, right? We didn't have that math keying. We just were like prime mat, click, go. And then when they do their motion blur moving back and forth as the camera goes, you would lose their edges. And so I was doing all these clever things. I was degraining, and oh, I thought I was hot shit. And then got a note back. It's like, where's the detail on their faces? Like, where are the pores and stuff? And I had degrained the shit out of it. And I had literally degrained Ben Affleck's face away. Colin Farrell's like target on his head was like smooth with just, round lines. It was, and when you're in it, you're looking at this like LaCie blue CRT monitor. Your vision hasn't gone because you're still in your 30s, and you're just like looking at it. You're like, everything looks fine. And then, they print it and put it up play it back on film back in the day. And, and they're like, there's no there's no detail. Where's the detail? We just watched this in a screening room, 40-foot screen. And, so it's interesting to know that there's like math behind things.
Yeah, and I feel like these days it's a bit more standardized versus it was a bit the Wild West back in the day. And if you weren't coming from DD or a few key studios that really helped pioneer a lot of it, then you just don't understand it. And yeah, but things have definitely changed. I was curious, VFX Legion, for you, can you talk a little bit about what it is to start with, and we'll go from there?
No, this is exciting because I started this company 10 years ago. Seems like yesterday. Legion came out of a project I had been working on sort of just in my own time, freelance work. I realized that I could, starting at Filmworks, working with Albert Piyun, rest his soul, say that, may his memory be blessed. Working with Albert, I had a house in Sacramento, and the office was in Santa Monica. And at the time, the work was slowing down. I moved back to Sacramento. I wanted to be still working. I still wanted to do the things. So I came up with this kind of elaborate data duplication thing. So I had like one of the big LaCie drives, stacked 2 hard drives in it because, what was that, like 5 gigs at the time? And oh my God, it's huge. And I would duplicate the data there, and I'd leave one set at the office in Santa Monica, and I'd go back to Sacramento, and I'd work on it, and I'd move just with the screen sharing, I'd move the project file over to there. So I'd work on it in After Effects, and I'd move the project file, and then I'd render it in both locations. So it was basically like an elaborate data duplication thing. But that was like the first using ISDN lines and whatever. I could call the office, get on a phone, control the computer, start playing back the QuickTimes and showing the boss the work. And it was like remote screening. This is like the year of our Lord 2000. I mean, it was like a long time ago, 23 years ago, I was doing remote work. And then as time went on, as things got better, bandwidth got better, it became like, well, I had a workstation at home and I could download, some shots, or I could go to the studio and they'd give me a hard drive and I'd come home and I'd plug it in. I did some remote work for Pixel Magic. And I realized that you could do, if you're good at something, like I was really good at green screens, I could get a series of 40 or 50 green screens. I could do them in a few days, 5 days, whatever. And, charging hundreds of dollars a piece, make a pretty good living at it, right? I mean, it's like, it seemed like the way to go. So I started doing more of that. And then I started doing the whole facility thing, doing ILM and doing Zoic and doing car commercials at a place called Sway.
Yeah, I was just chatting with Alex Thiessen earlier today. He's an old producer there. I'm actually working with like 3 or 4 Sway people, and I know Allan, like Nadell Maxmore, and so many, like way too many Sway people. Honestly. Anyway, sorry.
Yeah, no, it was a great team that we had there. And I'm actually getting to work with one of their dynamics guys, Matt Johnson, who, he came on to the Legion thing when we were looking for a dynamics artist. But no, I realized that you could make a living doing this, right? The idea that you could, send files or work on files remotely, do the thing. You could charge on a per shot basis, or from a business point of view, you could pay on a per shot basis. And what made us really different at the time, when we started 10 years ago, was that we're super transparent about everything. We would bid the shots at $50 an hour, artist rate. And we would say, I was just using my experience at compositing, I would say, well, this shot's going to take like 8 hours. Ostensibly for me, it would take 4, 3, 4, 5, but I was like, okay, average 8, right? So that's $400. So an artist would know in shotgun, it would say you get 8 hours and it's like a green screen, right? And you have 10 of those. If the first one takes 8 hours, the rest of them are going to take an hour, barring horrible paintouts and roto needs, whatever. I mean, but the idea here. So we kind of grew with that idea that, you know what you're going to make, you know what you're going to work on. You say yes or you say no. You don't have to take on shots. We assign them to our artists because we have, a stable of artists who want to work, and here you go. We'll play to your strength. We have somebody who does removals really well, so they'll get removals. We'll have somebody that does green screens really well. There's CG integration, whatever. And the work would go towards them, and they'd know exactly how much they were going to make. And it was a really solid system. And at the time, there was another facility. Yeah, Scarecrow came out. They were sort of like the ethereal competition. I never talked to them, or I never did anything. But
me neither. I just always heard about them. So it was, yeah.
We did a little recon, right? Trying to, Kyle Spiker, who is one of our partners, silent now, not working with the company. But in the beginning, he went and signed up to work with them. And he found out that they were having artists bid on the work. So they were literally taking the race to the bottom to the bottom.
Yeah.
Like they were making artists compete amongst other artists to get a low enough bid to get.
I already have thousands of questions about overhead and everything else that you're discussing with your model, but then with theirs, it's well, Gary said he'll do it for $10. Well, I'll do it for $8. Well, Gary said he'll do it for $7. It's like, I'll pay you to work on your shots.
Yeah. They did not survive. They lasted a year or two. They had a lot of overhead. They had a C-suite that had like 6 people in it, and I think it's like Saudi Arabian money or something. It was a prince or somebody who wanted to be in Hollywood. He wanted to work in Hollywood. They're weird stories, but the model I felt was like fundamentally broken. Like, don't take what's terrible about visual effects and pass that along to the artist. Yeah. Like, that's not what we as artists want to do. We want to make cool looking shit, right? Yeah. We just want to make, and we want to make money. We want to be able to pay the mortgage.
Yeah, most
So
artists don't care about the business side. It's scary for a lot of them, you know.
it is. So we tried to make it as transparent as possible. Like I said, they log into Shotgun, they see what shots they have assigned, they know how much they're going to make for it. When they're done, we have a portal online that they log into, and they say create an invoice, and it just populates the shots. You know, like, do you want to? So everything that's final, they can just invoice for. So at the end of the day, they spend 2-3 minutes and they poop, and it emails our accounting, emails them, and everyone's got an invoice. And then, like, within X amount of time, they get a direct deposit. And it was like super smooth, like, and it made a lot of people really happy to work with us because it was all known things, right? It was all just like, you just knew I'm going to make $3,000 this week, or I'm going to make $8,000 this week. Or
I'm not worried about, hey, I'm doing all this OT, and then they're going to turn around and be like, oh, we're not going to approve that OT, or hey,
right.
We said net 30, we meant net 120, and can we renegotiate right afterwards? Like all the horror stories you can think of.
There have been times, obviously, when somebody went over on a shot. Or we have a really slow artist. One of my favorite artists, he lives in New Zealand and worked as part of a team with us, but he was just slow. He was just like, he's very talented. He's just very methodical and slow. And so he'd always come back and be like, I know you bid 12 hours on this, but I'm at 16 hours. And I'm like, okay, can we meet you in the middle somewhere? Because obviously, like, everyone else is doing the exact same thing at like half the time. You know, we were definitely always in favor of the artist, like always in favor.
I used to run my own studio for quite a long time, and that was something that I had a few artists who interestingly kind of approached me with that, where it's like, hey, I don't want you to track my hours, that way I'm in early, you know, or let's say I need to do 6 hours this day, but I do 12 the next day, like, you know, can I just do day rate? And I think for some people, you know, trying to understand the right model for them, like not everyone needs to be you know, the same template, just because, as you said, like some people might overthink everything and they just take their time and that's how they are. Then it either comes down to, well, you get a lower rate, or you do day rate, then you can work as long, you know, as late as you want, as long as, you know, because that way it's results driven versus hourly, you know,
which is what we were. So, you know, we don't care what anybody does. The idea that, you know, it could be a second job, like Legion is a second job for a lot of people. And that's totally fine, because we're all about, can you deliver by the time that we need it? So I don't care if you work 8 hours. I don't care if you work 3 hours. Like, if you can nail a shot that you have 5 to 8 to 10 hours, you know, that you're going to get paid for anyway, and you can do it in 2, I don't care. Good job. Like, that's how I made money 15 years ago, you know, was doing just that. It's like, I want to pass that on. I want you to make money, because we're going to bid for that. And we have overhead, obviously bid their time. And then we have, you know, the overhead. We're like, what does it take to run the colo? What does it take to, you know, nuke licenses, Maya licenses,
supervisors, producers,
media shuttles, supervisors, producers, coordinators, all of that. So you have like all of that data and, you know, an Excel spreadsheet. But, you know, that money can be claimed, right? That money is specifically set aside for the artist. And so if they make it, great. If they don't, you know, if they go over, let's talk about it. Is there a reason? Did I underbid it? Because that happens, you know. I have totally, like, I have been given Avid temps that I did not see were made up out of 5 different plates because they didn't give me the source. All I saw was an Avid temp that looked pretty damn good. Like, huzzah. What a great Avid artist.
Yeah, I was just like, wow, like it seems like they've done that job for us, just not as well.
Yeah. But it turns out to be like a 20-hour shot. And, you know, I thought, 5-hour split screen or something, you know, just something minor.
I like that. I mean, that was a big game changer for me, was, you know, I could work one place charging hourly, or I could just do fixed bid. And for me, I started preferring to do that. This is way before COVID, where everyone's work from home now, but like being able to take on 4 or 5 projects at a time. And just because someone bids it out at 20 grand, and if I, you know, for let's say a couple of weeks of work, and then I can do it in a couple of days because let's say I wrote a tool, going back to what we're talking about with Blade.
Exactly. Yeah.
A lot of times where it's like my pipeline, I'm able to turn things around a lot quicker. That was something for me I just found to be extremely effective because I could work on multiple jobs and suddenly people aren't tracking your time. They care about the output. They care about, hey, you delivered great work. We're happy. That's all that needs to be said. And
100%.
if anything, people are a lot more transparent about, hey, can we do this for 5? Oh, well, we only budgeted for 4, and suddenly everyone's showing their cards rather than
the race to the bottom. Right. Yeah.
Exactly. And I think that's also producer's worst nightmare is like, especially in LA where hourly, time and a half, double time, all those things are factors. Like for me, it's always scary to think like, hey, like 3 or 4 artists could be working the weekends and working nights and I don't know about it until I get their invoice, and it's like, fuck, there's the profit gone, So in a lot of ways, just being upfront and saying, here's what you are requesting, here's what we're going to deliver, and at the same time, I'm more happy to push back on notes if they start going outside of the scope. It's like, okay, well, we can do that, but we'd only discuss this. So if we want to do those things, and you can have a lot more of a transparent conversation than you could if you're hourly, then you're just always like, yep. And, you don't know where the ship's heading until, towards the end when they're like, hey, we ran out of money, or all these other things you're not responsible for or are out of your control. So I kind of like that model.
Yeah, definitely. Starting as a remote company, so you get shunned because you're a remote company. Because like, well, what about security? It's like, well, we did 40 movies and, not one frame has ever been leaked. So, that doesn't work for everybody, but now we're TPN and everything and all that good stuff. But at the time it was just like such a, you could only work for like Blumhouse or whatever because, they didn't care so much. Like it wasn't like their IPs were not yet huge, right? Working on early purges and stuff like that.
They're not anal about it. Like, I was in
Exactly.
like Digital Domain's a good example of. I mentioned DD as just an example of like working on a Marvel film, and I remember COVID hits, and I remember talking with a few of the guys there, compositors actually, and I was like, hey, like, so what's up with the privacy? Like, people working from home, like Disney and the MPAA, like both very against that. Like, it's like, well, no one cares anymore because again, the show must go on. So security, I think, is a factor until
it's not. Right.
They come in. So,
that was. I heard the same thing of a buddy who works in the Trek universe. Everything was like locked down or whatever, and then like suddenly everyone had to be remote, and they still had to get the show done, and realized that like it's secure. Like if you're gonna get hacked, you're gonna get hacked. The FBI is out catching people left and right for doing hacking. Get a firewall. Protect yourself. Be smart, but at the end of the day, like whole movies aren't leaking, but so we started remote, and it was mostly just to have artists that wanted to like get out of the big cities. We weren't chasing the tax credit at the time. We were just existing. We were working, and we had artists in New Zealand, we had artists in South Africa, we had artists in Germany, Canada, the US, everywhere. And it was like you could choose the people that you wanted to work with, that gelled, that understood the pipeline. Right? They understood like the ask. It's like you're gonna put in a lot of work. You're gonna make a fair living. It's like it's a whole thing, and not everybody could do it. Not everybody can be this like self-starting individual. Beginning artists can't really do it. Mid-levels sometimes get frustrated and have a hard time with it. And there were some senior people we tried to work with that were just so jaded from bad pay. Unfair practices, businesses shutting down while they were trying to work, and all this stuff that like they literally didn't trust us enough. Even though I knew the people personally, I'd worked with them at Zoic. They were like, I'm not giving you DPX frames until I get paid.
Yeah, because you're online. It's like buying from Amazon or something. It's like, well, I bought online. Am I going to get ripped off? Or there's all these weird kind of
but it's like, I know you know me, we work together. It's like
car or something.
And we've been doing this for like 3 years, so it's not like we were new to the game. And it's really interesting because a lot of people are super defensive, and I've worked with these people both as people who work within our company, even are just like really suspect of everyone. right? And it's just like my belief. And, you know, some of Legion is kind of the cult of James, right? It's like my philosophies and my idea of like how you handle business is like, I don't like contracts. I hate contracts. Like, here's a bid. I'm going to give you this. I'm going to do all the revisions you need to get it done. And if you're stupid weird about getting something more than you asked for, I'm going to say, hey, there's an overage. And it's like this dance that just happens. And you get along, you trust, they trust, you work together, and you get paid. We've only been screwed by one person, and he's in jail now. So, for shenanigans. And he did shenanigans with us. And it was just like, that sucks, man. That was like $10,000 just vaporized. But yeah, he tried that too many times and eventually got nailed. I don't know. It's a trust thing. It's like when I never assume that people are doing something to be evil.
I think it's something too that a lot of the time, if things are going to go bad, they're going to go bad. Like contracts, everything else, like none of that really plays a factor. And again, email is just as good as a contract these days. If you have agreements, then you know it's all right there in writing.
And it'll never benefit the VFX studio anyway. So your contract written by a universal lawyer is your you know $350-$450 an hour lawyer is not going to somehow squeeze the blood out of a stone of a universal if for some reason they decide not to pay you. You know, they feel you're in breach of you're done. Like that's it. So whether you have one or not kind of doesn't matter. It'd be better to just trust people and work from that angle.
So I got a question about that because I think that's a really good point. I feel like the artists you're describing that usually have been screwed by studios. I was thinking about this earlier today that I always feel like it's the small. In fact, I was talking about this with a few people yesterday about it's usually the smaller studios that are the ones that screw everyone over, treat them like crap. They underbid everything, and then you know the artists are the ones on the receiving end. And I feel like you know you pay your dues at the smaller places, but as you grow into a more of a senior role, the smaller studios are not going to go try to hire you because A, they can't afford you, and B, they also know that you know you're not going to put up with their shit. So usually it's kind of a natural progression where you end up at better places that are professional. They're big or they're successful for a reason because they didn't pull that kind of crap. But we all get jaded by the smaller studios, and I'll say Tiger Hair, which I never would have said in a million years, but that was one of mine when I first moved to LA. But they're not in business anymore, so I'm kind of glad to throw them under the bus. But I've definitely worked at some places that will bleed you of 120-hour weeks and then, you know, at the very end, refuse to pay you for a year or two until suddenly they really need you, and then all your invoices got paid miraculously.
Yeah.
I guess for you, like, you know, building that trust, because what I'm getting at is I don't think that everyone should trust everyone right off the bat and play the game because it leaves them high and dry. But what are some of the things that you do with artists to try to build that trust with them, like to make them realize that, hey, we're legit versus, you know, the bad experiences you might have ran into in the past?
Yeah, that's interesting. I don't. So this is me. And we don't have like a recruiting team or whatever. We just have, you know, artists who know artists who know artists who know artists. And we get people.
Yeah, reputations, everything.
Yeah, we get people like filling out on our website and whatnot. And if something really catches my eye, I will immediately email them and say, you know, like, I really love your reel. We're not that busy right now. There's a strike on or whatever, but you know, I'm gonna hold on to the. So I'm this honest, you know, as I am being with you, with the teams, with the artists, with the people. So and it's always very straightforward. And have we had financial hardships? Yes. You know, there was a COVID thing, right? And there are movies that clients who don't want to pay very quickly. So you talk about like the 120-day invoice. That happens to us. And that does get passed along sometimes. You know, if you don't have like, you know, $300,000 of cash in the bank, then everyone's waiting for that money. And sometimes it means having to be, you know, responsible with and communicative to your artists, and just, you know, like, I'm not getting paid this week either, so you're not getting paid this week, and as soon as like this writes itself
Mhm.
will, make sure everything is good. And that has happened a couple of times. And I see that, the way the world works, like it could happen again, but it's about honesty, transparency, rapid communication, answering people back when they email you and they're wondering. And it's like, I get you, I feel you, I'm in the same boat as you. I always make sure that like my artists get paid before I do. And that can be a hardship too. But, it's all part of like, being an artist, being first an artist on the box and wanting to like make that experience good for other people. And so that other people can have that experience. And like, you can trust me because I trust myself. But, it won't always be perfect.
Mhm.
And that's just life. And so, that's.
No, I like that a lot. And you're right. Like, I think that people only get nervous when it is that you're not being communicative with them, but when you're upfront and transparent with people about, here's where it's at, and this is just reality. But also being able to kind of check in with them whenever people are getting nervous about like, hey, when's my paycheck coming? At least being able to respond means that they know that you're.
We didn't disappear.
Back on them. Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, I mean, there are companies. I have friends that have still not been paid by certain companies, and interestingly enough, principals of those companies went and started other companies, and were talking to us about working and like building a relationship and working together, and other ideas of working very closely together. And when I did a little research on them, I'm like, oh, what happened here? And they were like, oh, no, everything's fine. Everything resolved itself perfectly. And I'm like, hold on.
Everything's a change in the legal name,
I know artists. So I went and talked to artists who had worked there, and they're like, no, they still owe me money. And I'm like, okay. So this isn't going to be like a relationship that I'm going to want to pursue because these people are not honest. And it's like, if they're not going to be honest brokers to people in the past, then they're not going to be honest brokers with us. And to that's not what I want to put in the world. What I want to put in the world is exactly what you see here.
No, it's critical. It's so important.
It's just that, yeah.
How's the studio grown over the years? Obviously, 10 years. Happy birthday. What's the headcount these days, and like how have the projects, the structure? I know you're big on pipeline. Like, how have things kind of shifted and matured over those 10 years?
It's been a seesaw, really. It's been big and small and big and small. Right now, with the strike and with we're very fortunate to be on quantum leave coming into the new year, because I have like so many supervisor friends who are didn't have anything going into November or whatever.
We're on that show too I'm at Refuge, which we've done nice on that.
So working with Trent has been great. He's the bomb. Having that show has given us like enough work to like keep going in this environment where we don't work on the big shows. We're not working on Dune. They laughed at us when we wanted to work on John Wick, which was sad, but that's okay. I'll get over it one of these days. To answer your pipeline question, when we started out, I started out having to coordinate my own work, right? I had to in the backyard, in the shack in the back. And I had to ingest shots into Shotgun, and so I was like, After Effects, QuickTime, blah, blah, blah. And I immediately called like one of the scripters I knew from Zoic. And I was like, hey, Catlin, can you make me a tool that does this? And basically he took it, and then my wife's cousin came on and started. He's not even a programmer in the industry, has nothing to do with visual effects, but I was like, I need files to do this, this, and this. I need to interface with Shotgun to do this and this. I want to track this. When we were using Aspera, it was actually automating transfers from people's machines to the server and back. It was so dope. And so we had this whole system, and then obviously the invoicing system and ticket system and all that. Over the last few years, we've developed the co-location facility up in, it's in Kelowna, BC. It is part of our Canadian division. And so we've moved entirely on there, and now it's a new set of optimizations and tools and whatnot. So We're kind of in some ways back to square one, because I really want it to work a certain way. So I'm taking on a lot of the shots myself from Quantum so that I can work through it and build the system back up and find the efficiencies that I want to find. I think we're integrating Nuke Studio and our scripting in the background, and building a way for ingest and delivery and all of that, to make it more efficient than it was. Because client naming we had our own system of naming that was, worked with our folder structure and all that, and every file you knew what show it was, what sequence it was, what shot it was, what version it was, what it was, whether it was a comp or a paint or a track or whatever.
Mm-hmm.
And so like these fully authenticated names, client names, were like, they're just like, no, we want it to be like ILM does it, or did when I was there, where they're doing sequence names. So it'd be like KLM 005 010, and it's like, you don't know what movie that is. Yeah, you're in the shot, so you don't need to know anything about like what it is, because you're just there. And in our world, it's like, well, you have the directory structure, right? So you have the whole thing. And so when you have a file name, you want to be able to get down to it. And client names were sort of throwing a monkey into our delivery tool. So we had a delivery tool that would package up everything. It would look in Shotgun. It would compare all the things it needed to compare to make sure everything was right. And it would package it up and put it on the drive and ready to go to send to the client. And then, they would say, well, I want you to name it with this, or I want you to version with this, or I want your start frame to be this, or I want your embed to be this. And suddenly, like, the tools just couldn't evolve fast enough and be flexible enough. At first you want to do regex, and then like, okay, well, you've got regex in here, but now you've got things that blow away the regex rules. It's like, oh, damn it. So, once you're outside of pipeline, then you're like, well, shit. So now it's making a more bulletproof pipeline that's more adaptable to what the client wants, especially when you're working with other visual effects facilities.
Yeah.
We worked on a really big project called Asura, which was a Chinese movie. You might have heard of it. It came out for 2 days in China. And then because it cost like close to $1 billion to make, or $100 million or some insane number by Chinese standards, they made it go away. Like, you can't have a successful movie that costs that much money.
I swear I was talking to someone the other day who worked on that and told me about it. Can't remember much about it. I was just like, oh, that's interesting, and went about my day. But now that you bring it up again, it's like, oh yeah.
Yeah, we did hundreds of shots with other vendors. So there was just a ton of like back and forth.
Yeah.
They had this whole sequence where they had to have removals, wire removals, CG horses, CG people. And in the background, all the mountains had like gold in them. They had like streaks of gold in them. And so it was just layer over layer over layer, but it was made up out of like 5 vendors. You'd have Tippett doing animation. You'd have us doing the gold in the background. You had Indian vendors or Chinese vendors doing the wire removal. And it was just this like moving machine of integrated pipelines. It was awesome to be a part of something so big and know that like when it comes down to it, we can all team up and make some really cool shit. And it doesn't have to be different shit. Like, you don't need ILM to do the one sequence. You don't need DD to do like we did in Pirates, where ILM did all of this and then DD did the boat destruction in Pirates 3, and which I didn't even know existed until I saw the movie. I'm like, holy crap, who did this? I was like, this is awesome. But yeah, so just being a part of like that world where, I imagine visual effects facilities could come together and start working with their strengths and building something in a more unified space, I think is probably going to be like what helps us all succeed at the end of the day.
Yeah.
Maybe.
I feel like there's not that competition that there used to be either, where it's one vendor or another. It's now everyone's collaborative, and it's necessary in so many ways, just given how big films are these days.
Yeah. Well, even the TV shows, like, again, if we both work on the same thing, then, we're sharing shots on episodes, or we're sharing shots within episodes, or sharing alternating episodes, depending on what it is. So, we do a lot of matte painting and, world replacement, or uh, time change stuff, you know. But yeah, and that pairs perfectly with somebody else who can do spaceships. Like Zoic, I think, did episode 2, the space shuttle episode of Quantum Leap was, if I'm not mistaken, it was Zoic.
And to see that just, at some point. I still remember the one, but yeah.
Yeah, it was just, you know, Trent coming to us and being like, so I've got you for 1 and 3, but 2 is a big spaceship thing. Can you do that? We're like, not with all this other stuff. Just can't do it. And he's like, perfect, because it's going to Zoic. I'm like, okay, cool. You know, Legends of Tomorrow, we did some work on. We had like an effect, a look, a thing, and Zoic was a primary vendor. And whenever, you know, those force fields came up or whatever, it just said Legion on there. So it was cool. I like working with other companies. It's a lot of fun.
That's really awesome. I have 5,000 other questions, but I want to respect your time. Where can people go to find out more about VFX Legion?
VFXLegion.com is one of the best places. We've been doing some press on things like Quantum Leap Season 1. Some of the stuff with we worked on Wednesday for a hot minute, and some other things recently, Tulsa King. But yeah, VFXLegion.com. We're going to be updating the site as things are slowing down in the industry, and we have some time to dedicate towards that. But yeah, come by, say hi, leave a message, apply for a job.
Send reels,
yeah, send reels. We love seeing your seeing your work, seeing your reels.
Awesome.
There's some great stuff out there, some really talented people, and it's really nice to just get jaw-dropping reels that come in. Dynamics, somebody with Dynamics sent something in the other day, and it was just like huge, big, like all the biggest stuff in like the biggest movies. I'm like, holy crap! Oh, I so want to work with you, mostly because you've worked on this really cool stuff.
All your favorite shots in one reel.
Yes, that's exactly what it was.
That's awesome. Well, again, I really appreciate your time, and yeah, this has been really awesome to catch up.
Thanks, Allan. Appreciate it.